The smell of sin. That was the first thing I noticed as I pushed the closet door open. Like stale perfume lingering in the corners, clinging to the shirts, creeping through the empty hangers. It caught me off guard. You'd think a closet was just a place to keep clothes, shoes, random boxes of old photographs. But that afternoon, the moment I walked in, I swore I caught an odor that didn't belong. Something human, electric. The smell of guilt, or lust, or betrayal. I couldn't decide which. I stood there for a full minute, maybe two, breathing in shallow pulls of air. Why am I in this closet in the first place? My head was swimming. I'd been tearing through the house, half frantic, searching for something tangible. A piece of evidence, anything to confirm that I wasn't insane. For days I'd felt this shift in the air. Alicia's hushed phone calls, her forced laughter whenever I walked into a room, the way she kept glancing at our daughter with a fleeting look of complicity. And then the letter came. Or maybe it was just an email printout, a screenshot. Hell, I can't remember. The important part was that it said, "You were wild on that couch." I paused, reading that line over and over until my eyes blurred. When clarity returned, I realized my fingers were shaking so badly that I nearly tore the paper. I stared at the words, letting them sink in. "You were wild on that couch," over and over. The world around me had gone silent. It was as if everything stopped. No hum of the air conditioner, no ticking of the old clock in the living room. Just me, that piece of paper, and the deafening roar of my own heartbeat. The letter had come to me by accident. A glitch, some sloppy mistake on their part. Or maybe fate. I'd never asked to discover Alicia's secret, but here it was, spelled out in humiliating detail. It even described some frantic moment in a second-floor apartment, or maybe it was a studio loft. I'm not sure. It hardly matters. What matters is that Alicia was with another man, and the words "wild on that couch" were someone else's testament to how unhinged, how free, how passionately she gave herself away. To him. I couldn't keep reading it the first time. My chest felt tight. I leaned over the dining table, struggling not to retch. Everything in me wanted to deny it, to tear up that letter, burn it, bury the ashes. But I couldn't. My mind was on fire with the images. The couch, a frantic tangle of limbs. Her moans, I could almost hear them, though I'd never in my life heard Alicia that way. Not even in our best nights years ago, when we were younger and closer. And the worst part, this letter was so casual about it, almost bragging. Like it was something to cherish. I thought about our daughter, how she'd been acting strangely. Quiet, anxious, avoiding my eyes. And whenever Alicia left the house with some flimsy excuse, "I've got an event to plan, honey," or "I'm meeting a friend for coffee," my daughter would flinch like she was in on it, as if the guilt was too heavy for a teenager to shoulder. Alicia had no idea what it was doing to the girl, or maybe she did. Maybe she just didn't care. I took that letter, marched into the bedroom. The closet was half empty, which was unusual. Alicia had a habit of overstuffing every inch of it with dresses and shoes. But now some of her clothes were missing. That's why I ended up in there, sifting through the hangers, reaching for anything that would confirm the ugly truth. I guess, deep down, I'd hoped to find a note or a second phone. But all I caught was that stale, electric smell, the residue of something rotten. When I finally left the bedroom, the letter crumpled in my hand, I felt the house closing in around me. The hallway seemed narrower, the walls suffocating. At the end of the corridor was our daughter's room, the door ajar. She was inside, hugging her knees, her face pale as a ghost. She turned at the sound of my footsteps. Her lips parted, but she couldn't speak. She just stared at me with those big, sad eyes, glistening with tears she refused to shed. I thought about confronting her, asking how long she knew, asking how she could keep such a thing secret from her father. But the words wouldn't come. I was afraid of the answer. So I just nodded, a silent, pathetic acknowledgement. Then I walked away. I spent that night on the couch in the living room, tossing and turning, half expecting Alicia to come home at any moment. Part of me wanted to leap up and grab her by the shoulders, demand the truth right then and there. Another part of me wanted to run, hide in a motel on the other side of Dallas, maybe call my younger brother up in Cleveland and admit I'd failed at marriage. But I just lay there. I stared at the ceiling fan, listening to its whirring blades, trying to slow the boiling rage that churned inside my gut. She came in around 1 in the morning, quiet as a thief. I heard her keys jingle, the soft click of the lock. Then her footsteps on the hardwood floor. My heart hammered. I wanted to sit up, but I just froze, eyes closed. She hovered near me for a moment. I could feel her presence. And then she tiptoed to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. I didn't sleep at all. The next few days were torture. I'd go to work, try to focus on sales reports, nod along to my boss's daily pep talks. But everything was on autopilot. All I could see was that letter, those words. Wild on that couch. I pictured Alicia's body arching, her lips parted in ecstasy, the way she used to be with me back in the early days. Except now, it was some stranger who made her feel alive. Then I found out who he was. Actually, it wasn't difficult once I started snooping through her phone. She'd grown careless or overconfident. A few messages, a phone call she left in her history. Mikey less than 3. The texts were vague, but I pieced it together. Michael R., a freelance designer who'd moved to Dallas from somewhere in New Mexico. Younger than her, younger than me. Smooth-talking, apparently talented with computers. I pictured him as some cocky guy with a nice smile, maybe a bit of an accent, who convinced Alicia she deserved more excitement in her life. I confronted her one evening as she was washing dishes. My voice was low, trembling. I tried to keep it steady. "You want to tell me who Michael is?" I asked, my arms locked at my sides. She froze. A plate slipped in her hand and clattered against the sink. She didn't look at me. Water dripped onto her wrists. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshot. I held it up to her face. The color drained from her cheeks. She turned off the faucet, dried her hand slowly, so painfully slowly, as if stalling. "Look, I can explain," she finally said. "Explain what?" "That you're sneaking out at night, or that you're screwing him on some couch while I'm at work." My voice was rising. I didn't want it to, but it was impossible to contain. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her eyes glistened with something like fear, or maybe just shame. "John, please, lower your voice. Our daughter. She knows." I snapped. "Oh, she knows something's off, all right. You think she's blind." "Alicia." Her shoulders sagged. And that was it. I saw it in her face. Not the repentance, but the resignation. She realized she'd been caught, and no amount of gentle explanations would fix it. "John, I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured. "It just happened. I was lonely. You were always busy. Work, finances, the house. I felt like I was suffocating. Suffocating." I let out a bitter laugh. "And so you found him. This is how you handle." She turned on me, eyes wide with anger, no longer the meek, cornered wife. "You don't understand. For years, I've been trying to talk to you, to get some some connection. You're always locked in your own world, or you're too tired to notice me." I felt invisible. My fists clenched. "So that justifies." "No," she said, shaking her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No, it doesn't. But it's my truth." Her words only fueled my fury. I stormed out before I said something I'd regret, slamming the door behind me. Out on the porch, the humid Dallas night clung to my skin, and my thoughts hammered in my skull. She's the one who cheated, so why do I feel guilty? Because part of me suspected she was right about my distance, but that guilt twisted into rage. That doesn't give her a pass to break our vows. Over the next few days, we barely spoke. I slept on the couch. She tried to pretend everything was normal in front of our daughter. But at night, I heard Alicia crying softly in the bedroom. Once or twice I almost went in, some old reflex to comfort her. Then I remembered the letter. Those words seared in my brain, and all the warmth in me died. At work, I started making calls. One of our old acquaintances worked in event management as well, and I pressed them for details, dropping Michael's name. They knew him vaguely. A freelance designer who occasionally did VR presentations for local agencies. That was my first lead. My next clue came from a coworker who had seen Alicia one afternoon, about a month ago, in a downtown cafe with a younger man. She described him as dark-haired, wearing a hipster t-shirt. It matched what I knew. I was gathering bits and pieces, forming a plan in my mind. My anger hardened into something else. Mistrust. No, it was deeper. I wanted them both to pay. But more than punishment, I craved release. I couldn't live with the knowledge that she gave herself so freely to another man while I'd been ignoring her pleas for attention. Her betrayal was monstrous, but my sense of blame festered in the background. All I knew was that something had to break. A week later, she told me she was moving out for a while. I guess she expected me to fight it, or to break down. I just nodded. Fine, I said. She looked startled, as though she didn't expect me to be so calm. She said something about needing to figure out what she wanted. I think I grunted a response, something like, "Do whatever you want," and turned away. Inside, though, I was swirling with toxic energy. I realized I couldn't let this end with her quietly slinking off. She humiliated me. She'd used our daughter as a confessor of sorts, enlisting her to keep secrets from me. And the idea that Alicia might skip off to Michael's arms, free from consequences, made my stomach churn. I needed to lay everything bare. I needed to make her face exactly what she'd done. I started planning. First, I called up some of our mutual friends, couples we'd known for years, coworkers, neighbors who'd become close enough to host us for barbecues. I told them I had a major announcement and that I needed them to gather at our place on Saturday evening. My tone must have sounded urgent, or maybe just unhinged enough, that they all agreed to show up. Second, I arranged for something special. VR headsets. I discovered Michael's social media accounts, found a few references to his VR bedroom experiments. He boasted about how real it felt, how immersive. Could this be connected to Alicia? Possibly. I dug further and discovered that Michael had some personal archive of private VR captured moments, like a twisted diary, but digital. I ended up contacting a friend of a friend in the tech world, who owed me a favor for hooking him up with a sweet furniture deal last year. He managed to get me a copy of a certain VR recording. I don't want to detail how. It was probably illegal or close enough. But money talks, and my friend was resourceful. One look at the file. Well, I only needed a few seconds of it. I almost threw up on my desk. It was Alicia's voice, those breathless gasps, that faint moan she makes when she's on the edge. And Michael's face, sweaty, triumphant. They had apparently filmed themselves. My entire body went cold, but I was too angry to stop. This was the ammunition I needed. I spent a sleepless week double-checking every detail, renting VR sets, planning how to project this monstrosity to maximum effect. I felt sick inside, but determined. I kept hearing Alicia's words. I felt invisible, and part of me hissed in response. Then let them see you now, Alicia. Let them all see you. When Saturday arrived, I texted Alicia to be there at 8 p.m. sharp, telling her we needed to talk about the final terms of our divorce. She resisted at first, but I insisted, mentioning that our friends would be there to witness a crucial discussion. Maybe curiosity got the better of her, or maybe guilt. Either way, she agreed. By 7:30 p.m., our living room was packed with a dozen people, some old college friends, my coworkers, the neighbors. They all sensed something was off. There was an uneasy hush. A couple of them tried to make small talk, but the tension was suffocating. I offered no explanations. I just paced back and forth, glancing at the VR equipment I'd set up. Nobody had a clue what was about to happen. At 7:55, Alicia walked in. She looked around, startled by the crowd. She dressed simply, a blouse, jeans, hair pinned up. She offered a tight smile, her eyes flicking around for any sign of normalcy. Then she saw me by the coffee table, the VR gear neatly laid out. Her cheeks drained of color. "John," she said quietly, stepping forward. What's going on?" Before I could answer, the front door opened again. I didn't expect that. It was Michael, standing there in a casual button-down shirt, eyes scanning the room with a wary curiosity. I felt my jaw tighten. Had she invited him? Or had he followed her? Alicia turned, saw him, and paled further. "Michael, what are you doing here?" He took a tentative step in. "You told me you had to come by for something important, that it might be big. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Her eyes flashed with fear, realization dawning that this was no normal gathering. She glanced back at me, voice trembling. "John, please, let's talk in private." I ignored her. "Everyone, please, have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chairs I'd arranged around the living room. My voice was shockingly calm, even to my own ears. "We're going to watch something tonight." There was a murmur among the guests. A couple of them gave Alicia sympathetic looks, confused but worried. I motioned to a tall stack of VR headsets. Some had integrated screens for external projection, so that everyone could see what was being viewed in real time. But I also had a bigger display ready on the TV, just to ensure no one missed a thing. Alicia rushed up to me, grabbing my arm. I could feel her fingers trembling. "John," she whispered, "you can't do this." I turned my gaze on her. "Watch me." She locked eyes with me for a moment, and I saw that behind her terror was something else. Shame. Maybe regret, or maybe anger at being outmaneuvered. She opened her mouth to plead again, but it was too late. I'd already grabbed the remote, tapped a button, and the living room TV flickered to life. At first, there was only static. Then the image stabilized. The perspective was shaky, probably a mounted VR camera on Michael's side table. The angle was partial, but enough to see Alicia stepping into frame. She wore a dress I recognized, a short, summery thing that I once admired on her. She turned to face Michael, half smiling, half laughing, the way she used to laugh when she was truly happy. He appeared in front of her, arms sliding around her waist, pulling her in. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another person uttered a soft, "What the?" Michael let out a strangled, "Oh God, turn it off." But I ignored him. The footage progressed. Alicia sank onto a couch, presumably. The pair started kissing, and I had to look away for a moment. My heart hammered so violently I thought I might pass out. But I forced myself to turn back, to see their faces, to watch as Alicia moaned into him, her hand in his hair, her body arching. And then the audio. My God, the audio was so clear, her breathy whispers, calling his name. His low groan, telling her how perfect she felt. I heard a few people in the room shifting uncomfortably. Someone coughed, a choked, disbelieving sound. Then, as the scene intensified, clothes pulled aside, Alicia's nails raking down Michael's back, a wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. One of my friends grabbed his wife's hand and shook his head in horror, eyes wide. Alicia darted forward, trying to snatch the remote from me. I jerked it out of reach. She stumbled, tears streaming down her face. "John, please, stop. This is insane." I stood there, jaw clenched, letting the footage play a moment longer, just long enough for everyone to understand the full, undeniable truth. Just long enough to see Alicia bury her face into Michael's neck, letting out a small cry of pleasure. Then I hit pause. The image froze, her half-naked, him pressed against her, faces twisted in unguarded passion. Silence slammed down. No one dared to breathe. Alicia sank to her knees beside the coffee table, hand over her mouth. Michael stood rooted to the spot, face ashen. I let my eyes sweep across the people present, capturing their expressions: shock, disgust, pity, confusion. I wanted Alicia to feel that judgment. I wanted her to experience the weight of the stare she had earned. I turned the TV off, tossing the remote aside. "I'm sure you all have questions," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "But I only have one thing to say tonight. This is why my marriage is ending." An older neighbor stood up, face red, obviously torn between sympathy for me and embarrassment. Alicia tried to speak, but no words came out. Her tears flowed freely, streaking her makeup. Michael took a step toward her, but I blocked him with a hard glare. "You don't get to touch her," I said softly. He swallowed. "Look, man, I didn't." "Didn't what?" "Didn't think you'd get caught." I gave a hollow laugh. "Tough luck." He closed his mouth. Alicia sobbed quietly, still on her knees. One by one, the onlookers began to file out, some pausing awkwardly to pat me on the shoulder, others simply avoiding eye contact and slipping out into the night. Within minutes, the only people left were me, Alicia, Michael, and our daughter, who'd been hiding near the stairs, tears rolling down her cheeks. She'd come home a bit earlier than we planned, and I hadn't even noticed in my blind rage. I turned, locking eyes with her. She looked destroyed. I felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into this spectacle, but it was too late to undo it. My daughter just stared at her mother, then at me, and whispered, "Daddy, please." I closed my eyes, trying to breathe. The rage was still there, a coiled snake in my chest, but it was mixed with a hollow ache. All that remained now was to face them both. Alicia pushed herself up from the floor. She was trembling all over. "You've ruined me," she whispered hoarsely. "I can't ever. They'll never see me the same." You planned this just to humiliate me." I didn't answer her question directly. "We're getting divorced. That's a fact. Papers will be served soon enough." My voice was ice. "I don't want an apology. I don't want your tears. All I wanted was for you to feel just a fraction of the betrayal you gave me." Her eyes flicked to Michael, who stood there, shoulders tight. "Alicia," he said softly, "let's go." She hesitated, looking between him and me. Then she shook her head. "No, I can't just. My daughter, John." Our girl let out a shuddering sob. "Mom, why did you do it? Why didn't you just talk to Dad?" Her voice was heartbreakingly raw. Alicia reached for her, but my daughter shrank back. That was when I realized the damage done to our family might never be repaired. Maybe Alicia saw that too, because she pressed her lips together, tears streaming, and lowered her hand. Michael placed a hand on Alicia's shoulder, but she shrugged it off. She stared at the floor. "I was lonely," she whispered. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." I felt no satisfaction. I'd expected to feel some triumphant release, but there was just an emptiness, a hollow space where my love for her used to be. Eventually, Alicia walked out the door alone. Michael stood there for a moment, then ran after her, calling her name. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving me and my daughter in the devastation I'd unleashed. I braced myself against the back of a chair, trying to calm the shaking in my arms. My daughter was crying softly, biting her lip to keep from wailing. I wanted to comfort her, but all I could do was whisper her name. She looked up at me, eyes filled with hurt and confusion. "Dad." "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know what to do. I saw them once, and Mom made me promise not to tell you. I know," I whispered, stepping forward to pull her into my arms. She buried her face in my chest, sobbing. I stroked her hair, feeling tears burn at the corners of my own eyes. My anger had burned itself out, leaving only grief and regret. We stood like that for a long time, until her sobs quieted. Then she pulled away, wiping her nose on her sleeve, eyes puffy. "Dad, what happens now?" I exhaled, feeling every muscle in my body ache. I don't know, I admitted. But one thing's for sure. I'm not the same man I was. And your mother, she's not the same woman you thought she was. My daughter gave a tiny nod. The enormity of the situation weighed on both of us. We retreated to our respective rooms. She locked herself in hers, and I went to the living room, stumbling over the equipment I'd brought in for the VR show. The hush of the empty house pressed down like a heavy blanket. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up, collecting glasses, picking up chairs, carefully packing away the VR headsets. Each piece I touched felt like a piece of my marriage shattering. I couldn't tell if I regretted what I'd done. On one hand, it was brutal, cruel beyond measure. On the other, I felt it was the only way to make Alicia understand the depth of my pain. She wanted excitement, wanted to feel alive. Well, I thought bitterly, she got it. I didn't see Alicia again for weeks. She texted a few times, mostly about logistics, what to do about our daughter's school events, whether she could come by to pick up more clothes. She never asked for forgiveness, and I never offered it. Word spread quickly through our circle of friends. Whispers of the VR fiasco, the humiliating footage. People either condemned me for going too far or said I was justified. In truth, I knew it would probably follow Alicia forever. She would walk into any room of acquaintances, sense them whisper about the scandal, about how wild she'd been with another man, and how her husband had turned that wildness into a public spectacle. As for Michael, I heard rumors he dropped out of some local design gigs, apparently humiliated or outraged that his personal footage was stolen. I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. The gist was a threat of legal action. I never responded. Maybe they had grounds to sue, maybe they didn't, but he never followed through. One evening, while I was doing dishes, the simple tasks that keep you sane, my mind drifted back to the day Alicia and I first met. She was so vibrant, so different from anyone I'd known. She had that spark in her eye, a warmth in her voice. I thought she was my soulmate. Then I remembered the letter. You were wild on that couch. My gut clenched. I let the plate in my hand slip, smashing into the sink, shards everywhere. For a moment, I stood there, panting, tears in my eyes. Why? I asked the empty kitchen. Why couldn't we fix it before it came to that? The house felt too quiet, too big. My daughter was spending the weekend with a friend, leaving me alone with my regrets. I cleaned up the broken plate, turned off the lights, and let myself collapse on the couch. The same couch where Alicia and I used to watch late-night movies, her head on my shoulder. The ghost of her presence weighed on me, but I felt no longing for her now, just sorrow and a strange relief. That night, I dreamed of the smell in that closet, the smell of sin, of secrets. In the dream, Alicia's voice echoed around me, calling my name, and I kept turning in circles, searching for her in the dark. Then the smell grew stronger, suffocating me, until I woke up drenched in sweat. Weeks bowled into months. The divorce process was set in motion. We decided to keep it as civil as possible for our daughter's sake, but the damage was done. Our girl was shell-shocked, quiet in a way that made my heart ache. I tried to be gentle, asked her if she wanted therapy. She nodded, and I found a counselor. Alicia paid half. That was the extent of our communication, logistical, minimal. One afternoon, Alicia came by to collect some of her belongings. I let her in, arms crossed over my chest. Her eyes were sunken, face pale. She didn't look well, physically or emotionally. She started rummaging through her old dresser, pulling out clothes and keepsakes. After a few minutes, she stopped, turned to me. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but I just shook my head. I wasn't in the mood for a lecture or apology. She sighed and continued packing, but then, right before leaving, she lingered in the doorway. "John," she said softly, "I don't expect you to ever forgive me, but I do want you to know I'm sorry for how I hurt you, and for how I involved our daughter." I stared at her, my face devoid of expression. "I know," I said. Go. She lowered her eyes and left. I listened to her footsteps fade down the driveway, followed by the sound of the car engine starting. Something in my chest loosened, like the final tether to a life that had slipped away. As the weeks turned into months, I began focusing on my own healing. I realized that for years, I'd been burying my feelings under piles of responsibilities. Alicia's betrayal had cracked me open, forcing me to see my own flaws. She was right about one thing. I'd been distant, ignoring the small cries for emotional connection. But her solution was as selfish as it was cruel. Two wrongs don't make a right, and I'd come to believe that, in the end, betrayal always leaves scars no apology can mend. At times, memories of that night flashed through my mind. The crowd in the living room, the hush before the footage started, Alicia's sobs afterward. Part of me felt monstrous for orchestrating such a public humiliation. Another part of me insisted it was the only path to closure, because in that moment, I'd shifted the burden onto her. I wouldn't carry it quietly on my shoulders, waiting for time to maybe or maybe not absolve me. The letter she'd received from Michael, or the note, the text, whatever it was, it had ended up in my hands purely by chance. That piece of happenstance became the catalyst for all that followed. I sometimes thought about the universe's strange sense of timing. Maybe it was inevitable that I'd find out. Maybe Alicia wanted me to, subconsciously. Maybe she was crying out for an explosion that would force change in our stale marriage. I couldn't know. I did know one thing. Revenge didn't bring peace, but it brought a certain liberation. Because after the VR fiasco, after everyone saw what she'd done, there was no question who'd been wronged. No illusions could remain about our future. The end was scorched into the minds of every witness. That final clarity, painful as it was, freed me from the endless cycle of maybe we can fix this. There was no going back. I sank into a new routine. Work kept me busy. I spent weekends with my daughter, taking her to counseling, encouraging her to hang out with her friends, trying to show her that I was still there for her, no matter how broken we both felt. We had quiet dinners, watched old action movies from the 80s, my secret comfort, and tried to piece together some semblance of normal life. One evening, she asked me, "Dad, do you still hate Mom?" I set down my fork, choosing my words carefully. "I don't hate her," I said at last. "I'm disappointed, hurt, sometimes angry, but hate? I don't think so." She studied me for a second. "But you showed that video in front of everyone. That was pretty huge." I looked at my daughter's face, so young, yet forced to grapple with adult horrors. I sighed. I know, it was a harsh thing to do. A lot of people would say it was cruel, maybe even unforgivable, but at the time, I felt like I was drowning. I wanted her to understand what she'd done, really understand it. And in a twisted way, I guess I wanted to be sure she couldn't just walk away without facing consequences. My daughter mulled that over, then nodded. "I get it. I don't like what she did, and I don't like that it came out so publicly, but I guess I understand." We left it at that. A fragile acceptance. I knew she still had her own wounds to heal, feelings of betrayal from both parents. But at least we were talking now. Some nights we'd sit on the porch, the Dallas breeze rustling through the yard, and chat about random things, her classes, her friends, her future. I clung to those conversations like a lifeline, determined not to repeat the mistakes that had driven Alicia away. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. I moved forward with as little drama as possible. Alicia got an apartment across town. Our daughter stayed with me most of the time. Though we arranged visits, Alicia tried to keep those visits from feeling forced, but the tension was undeniable. Michael was nowhere in sight, from what I heard. Whether he and Alicia were still seeing each other, I didn't know. I refused to ask. The shape of our family was forever changed, shattered into pieces that no amount of glue could fix. On the day the final decree arrived in the mail, I sat in my empty living room, staring at the thick envelope. The official language was cold. Dissolution of marriage. End of the line. I couldn't say I felt relief or sadness. Maybe I felt both, tangled up in a hollow numbness that I'd grown accustomed to. I gave a short laugh, reading the final paragraph. Incompatibility. Is that what they called it these days? I set the papers aside, walked down the hallway, and opened the closet door. It was nearly empty now, just a few forgotten coats, an old pair of boots. I inhaled deeply. The air smelled dusty but free of that rotten tension. The smell of sin was gone. The house was mine now, untainted by her secrets. Yet in that emptiness, I felt a pang of loss. Sometimes you don't realize how much space a person occupies until they vanish, even their scent. The next weekend, I decided to clear out every trace of her from the house. Not out of spite, but because I needed a new start. I rummaged through drawers, found her jewelry box with the little gold necklaces, a pair of earrings shaped like tiny roses. All the small reminders of our life together. I placed them in a cardboard box. In the bedroom, I stripped the bed, vacuumed the corners, threw out old magazines she'd hoarded. I found an old photo of us from our wedding day, hidden behind the nightstand. We looked so happy, so young. I stared at it for a moment, then placed it gently in the box. A piece of personal history, for better or worse. When I was done, I stepped back and looked around. The walls looked bare without her framed pictures. The entire house felt bigger, emptier. But it was mine. My heartbreak, my quiet sanctuary now. I could almost breathe again. A couple of our mutual friends, those who stayed in touch, called to ask how I was doing. Some were still shocked about the night of the VR expose. A few expressed compassion, saying they understood the depths of betrayal I must have felt. Others were more guarded, uncertain if they could condone that level of public shaming. I always responded with a polite, "I did what I had to do," and left it at that. I wasn't going to ask for anyone's approval. Every so often, I'd catch glimpses of Alicia's social media. She'd post pictures of scenic places in Colorado, or volunteering at events for some charity. She smiled in those pictures, but it never looked genuine to me. Maybe that was just my bias. Sometimes she posted a vague quote about healing and mistakes. I'd feel a brief flash of anger, then let it fizzle. I'd learned the hard way that clinging to fury only corrodes your insides. My daughter and I continued therapy. Bit by bit, we found ways to talk about the pain and the confusion. She told me how responsible she'd felt, how Alicia made her keep secrets. She cried when she realized it wasn't her duty to protect her mom from me. I held her hand, reassured her she wasn't to blame. Over time, her eyes lit up again when she talked about her future plans. She even joined a school club, started making new friends. I clung to that as a sign that we were moving past the wreckage. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in the living room with an old box of records, sipping a beer. I found a Sinatra album Alicia, and I used a slow dance to when we first got married. Holding it in my hands, I remembered how she'd thrown her arms around my neck, gazing up at me with pure adoration. I saw that memory clearly. The flicker of candlelight, her hair brushing my cheek, the soft hum of Sinatra in the background. That was the Alicia I'd loved. I wondered where it had all gone wrong. Part of me wanted to smash the record, to destroy every relic of us. But I didn't. I set it aside carefully. Some memories deserve to exist, even if the people who made them had changed beyond recognition. The next few months passed with a kind of melancholic stability. I found a new normal, focusing on my job, my daughter, and the slow process of learning to be alone. Sometimes I'd wake in the dead of night, remembering Alicia's sobs and the look on her face when she realized I'd invited all those people to witness her disgrace. A small part of me would twist with guilt. Then the image of that VR recording would resurface, and I'd feel that scorching anger all over again. Wild on that couch. No, I reminded myself, she made her choice, and so did I. It wasn't until a full year after the incident that I ran into Alicia unexpectedly at a local cafe. She was sitting alone, a cup of tea in front of her, staring out the window. When she spotted me, Her eyes went wide, and she gave a tentative smile. I paused, torn between ignoring her and acknowledging her. After a moment, I sighed and walked over. "Hi," I said quietly. She nodded, looking nervous. "John. How have you been?" I shrugged. "I'm getting by." We stood in awkward silence. She fiddled with her teacup. "How's our daughter?" she asked. "She's okay. She's strong. Better than I am, probably." Alicia attempted a ghost of a smile. "I'm glad to hear it." I started to turn away, but she touched my arm. "John, listen, I just want to say, I know it was horrible. Everything. You had every right to be angry. I'm just sorry it ended like that. Even if part of me will never forgive the way you exposed me. I understand." Something fluttered in my chest. The old pain, the old guilt. I nodded stiffly. "We can't change the past. We can only live with it." She drew a shaky breath. "Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do." For a moment, we just looked at each other. I saw lines of sorrow around her eyes I hadn't noticed before. Maybe she saw the tension in my posture. We were two people who once shared a life, now separated by betrayal and vengeance. No matter what happened next, that chasm would remain. I wished her well, then left the cafe. Out in the Dallas sun, I paused on the sidewalk, inhaling the warm air, letting it fill my lungs. A wave of emotion surged up. Regret, relief, anger, pity. I closed my eyes, exhaled. Revenge isn't punishment, it's liberation. I'd forced her to confront what she did in the most brutal way possible. Some might call me a monster for it. But without that spectacle, I might still be stuck in a marriage built on lies, slowly suffocating in her secrets, or maybe I'd have been too weak to leave. This way, there was no doubt. We ripped each other's hearts out in the open, for all to see. That night, I returned home, fixed dinner for my daughter, and we talked about her latest school project. I felt a calmness in me, a stillness I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. But it was a sort of acceptance, and maybe that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and my life continued on its new path. I tried dating once, but the emotional scars were fresh. I found myself comparing every woman to Alicia, to the memory of what we'd been before everything unraveled. I realized I wasn't ready, so I let it go for the time being. Time is a strange thing. It dulls even the sharpest pain, eventually. The memory of Alicia's betrayal and my subsequent revenge, terrible as it was, began to lose its choking hold. I lived. I laughed again, sometimes, usually when joking with my daughter, or talking to my coworkers about random nonsense at the office. I caught glimpses of the man I used to be, the one who wasn't always so guarded or cold. I wondered if someday I might fully be that man again, or maybe I'd be someone new, shaped by tragedy, but not defined by it. One evening, after a frustrating day at work, I opened the closet in the bedroom to grab a fresh shirt. I paused, remembering that first moment when I thought I smelled sin in the shadows. I exhaled slowly. The closet smelled like fabric softener and a faint hint of my aftershave. Nothing else. No secrets here anymore. I stood there, letting the memory of that day wash over me one last time. All the heartbreak, fury, and desperation that led me to orchestrate that night of humiliating truth. It had felt like an inferno raging through my life, leaving everything charred. But as the months wore on, I learned that the ashes can be swept away. The scorched earth can sprout new growth, if I let it. And so I closed the closet door, walked over to the window, and looked out at the skyline of Dallas. Cars passed by in the distance, headlights flickering. The city felt huge, teeming with endless lives, each with its own joys and sorrows. I realized that my story, as shattering as it was, would fade into the background of time. Life would go on. Mine, Alicia's, even Michael's, wherever he ended up. I went to bed that night, lying awake in the darkness, listening to the soft hum of the AC. My mind flickered with thoughts. Regret, guilt, acceptance, relief. Images of Alicia as she once was, of our daughter's tearful face, of Michael's stunned expression, and that final moment when I paused the video, freezing them in a tableau of betrayal. It was ugly and raw, but it was the truth. Somewhere between those swirling memories and the first light of dawn, I found a fragile peace. No illusions, no unearned forgiveness, just an understanding that we survived. That day by day, we could move forward. And so I did. I let my eyes drift shut, my breath steadying. The old me was gone. The new me had scars, but also a certain clarity. Sometimes revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about finally letting go of the pain they inflicted. I slept, and for the first time in many months, I dreamed of nothing at all.